Hi, fifth graders. Today we are going to be reading chapter 4 of Pillage by Obert Sky. Excerpt from section 2 of The Green Got Not as recorded by Daniel Phillips. In the year of 1809, Edward Pillage married a woman by the name of Lucinda, and they eventually had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. Their son was named Bruno. Sadly, Edward had no affection for his daughters, but he cared deeply for his son. Aside from accruing wealth and power, Bruno was the only thing Edward had an interest in. Chapter 4, Up to the Old House. The train pulled away, moving backward and leaving me standing alone on the platform. The 2 other passengers had disappeared, having places to go and things to do. The clock on the train station pointed out clearly that it was 12:13. Although it was just past high noon, the mist in the gray air made it seem much later. I stood with my suitcase and backpack, wondering what in the world I was going to do. It was cold, and I wished I had brought a jacket or a long-sleeve shirt. I actually missed the heating duct I had gotten caught in. At least I had been warm there, and I had known where I was. I looked out the large archway in the city streets. Through the mist, I could see people walking up and down the cobblestone walkways, doing business or talking to others. King's Plot was alive and busy. The only lull in activity was the train platform where I stood. A thick fume of mist pulled through the air, blocking my view of the archway, making me feel like a pointed island in the middle of a foggy ocean. I stepped forward just as the sound of the knocking echoed around me. I looked around, nothing but fog. Again with the knocking. The fog was getting thicker. I couldn't tell if the noise was coming from behind me or in front of me, so I moved to the side of the archway as if to step out of the way of whatever was making the noise. The knocking grew louder. Thump, pause, thump. I could see the tall form of someone or something materializing in the fog. I moved back, clutching my backpack and hoping whoever was coming was both kind and filled with information that would help me know what to do. The form stepped out of the fog and stopped directly in front of me. The shape belonged to a tall man with thin shoulders and crooked legs. He wore a felt cap and a vest that was buttoned up. His shirt sleeves were long and white. He looked at me with dark black eyes and a mild smile so buried that it would take pliers to pull it out. He had a bull nose and ears that stuck out just like mine. In his right hand was the cane that had been the cause of all the commotion. "Mr. Phillips?" he asked, his voice flat as a glass. "I think so," I said, confused. Are you or are you not Francine's boy?" Hearing my mother's name made me feel worse. "Yes," I answered. He looked at my single suitcase. "Is there more?" he asked. I shook my head, and he extended his hand to take the handle of my suitcase. "Welcome," he said. "My name is Thomas. This way, please." I stayed directly behind Thomas, afraid of losing him in the mist. He walked slowly, moving through the archway and down around the station. We stepped into an open courtyard bursting with rose bushes. The bushes looked weighed down by the gray and wet weather. Outside of the courtyard, there was a large black car. It surprised me to see it. The town of King's Plot had such an old feeling that to me something modern looked out of place. Thomas opened the back door and I climbed in. He loaded the luggage into the trunk and then got behind the wheel, sliding in his cane to the passenger seat. He turned to look back at me. "Have I welcomed you?" he asked. "Yes," I answered. "Of course," he sighed heavily. "Sit back. The ride will take about an hour." "An hour?" I said, surprised by the length of time. "The manor sits well above the town." "Manor?" I liked the sound of that. "So, is it always this wet?" "Always," he answered, pulling back the car out into the main street and driving slowly through the town. The street was lined with ivy-covered covered buildings and small shops that sold individual items. One sold shoes, one sold hats, and others sold vacuums. I looked around for a McDonald's or a Walmart, but there was nothing of the sort within view. I couldn't even see a gas station or a freeway. "Do you have a Taco Bell here?" I asked. "Certainly not," Thomas said, his voice tinged with insult. "A mall?" "There are strict covenants in King's Plot," he replied, as if that would clear it all up for me. I had no idea what he meant, but I stopped asking questions. We drove past a single tree standing behind a sign that read King's Plot, quaint and courteous. I saw large homes that looked as old and regal as those in the movies. A girl was playing with a hula hoop, and I watched a milkman collect empty bottles from off a large black porch. The mist moved in weird patches and strips, making everything look slightly out of focus. The homes became sparse and eventually disappeared altogether. Thomas followed the narrow road into the trees and up the side of the mountain. The car traveled the switchback road, rising in altitude. We passed through a long tunnel that was a touch too dark for my taste. Coming out of the tunnel, we made a sharp turn that directed us even further up the mountain. "How high are we going?" Thomas didn't answer. Instead, he slowed as another sharp corner slung us higher yet. We went through another tunnel that was not quite as long as the first and came out onto a flat shelf of green land. 2 turns later, I spotted a large house. It looked impressive enough to be called a manor. Massive granite lions guarded a winding driveway. My heart stopped, thinking this was where we were headed. We passed it by without slowing. I could see another building in the back in the woods. It had more chimneys than I could count and a vast front lawn. 2 men carrying shotguns crossed the lawn with dead birds in their grip. We passed that driveway as well. The mist was different at this height. It felt like we were inside a large patch of wet sky. Everything looked greener and danker than in town. I could see a few birds flying through the soggy air. I worried about them flying over the gentlemen who were carrying shotguns. Thomas reached up and pushed something near the driver's window visor. He coughed once as if signaling our arrival. I looked up ahead, wondering where we were. I could barely see 2 large ivy-covered gates begin to separate. It looked like the forest was opening itself up to swallow us whole. Near the gate was a small, empty shack with a clay-tiled roof. The gargoyles were perched on top of the gates, the 2 on the ends reaching down with their claws, and one in the center reaching up. I looked out the back window of the car, and my breath was stolen by how far we'd traveled. Through the low clouds and the mist, I could see King's Plot miles below in the valley. Wow! The gates yawned and we drove through. The driveway was brick and lined with thick shrubs and old statues. I could see a large house in the distance. It was back behind the trees with a pitched roof and 3 chimneys. It wasn't as enormous as the other mansions we had passed, but it was 10 times larger than any place I thought I would ever live in. "Is that it?" I asked, pointing through the front window. "No," Thomas said. "Those are the stables." The car followed the bend in the driveway, and the view parted to reveal my uncle's mansion. I couldn't keep my jaw from falling open. The house was not a house, nor was it a mansion. It was somewhere between a mall and a castle. There were more chimneys and windows than any chimney or window store could ever possibly stock. I counted at least 7 floors. The 6th floor of the manor was circled by thick stone balcony, and the 7th floor sat back a bit with massive windows that were dark and shuttered. The house was made of brown stone, and on each side of the mansion was a tall, bulb-shaped turret rose into the air like a tethered balloon. Wicked and mysterious-looking gargoyles circled each turn and lined the stone railing of the balcony. Centered on the very top of the mansion was a rounded window-lined room capped by a large copper dome. The car pulled around a spectacular fountain shaped like two huge serpents wrapped together. Water shot from their stone mouths in long strands, looking like wet, forked tongues. We drove through a large breezeway to a back door that easily dwarfed every front door I had ever seen. It was obvious my uncle wasn't just wealthy, he was 2 steps beyond filthy, stinking rich. I smiled, feeling happy for the first time in weeks. Thomas stopped the car and got out. He shuffled around the car and up the steps to the back door of the manor. I had expected him to help me get my luggage, but he only popped the trunk. Okay, I said to myself, stepping out of the car and onto the brick driveway. I looked up and marveled at the sheer height of the home. I felt like a toy action figure outside a playhouse. I half expected a huge hand to reach down and begin moving me around. I could see the gargoyles way up above, hanging out over the edge of the balcony, glaring down at me. I got my luggage out of the trunk and stood there. Thomas appeared at the door and told me to hurry and come inside. I climbed the 7 steps and entered. I shut the door behind me. Inside, the walls were a dull blue. The ceiling was carved with what looked to be a map of the world. It was a large hallway that stretched at least 50 feet before turning a corner. To my right was a square doorway that opened into an enormous kitchen. I could see a fire burning in the spacious fireplace and a large wooden cutting block covered with dead birds. I wondered if they had been shot like the others I had seen. Thomas clapped. A woman with a lazy right eye and a well-stained apron crawled out from a far corner in the kitchen and stared at Thomas with her one straight eye. She wasn't super fat, but she was completely padded, so much so that I felt she would have been perfectly unhurt if she were to be dropped from a 6-foot-tall tower. "Did you clap at me?" she asked Thomas with disdain. "I wanted you to meet—" "You clap at horses or after a decent show," she snipped. "This house has long since lost the opportunity to act snooty." "The boy is—" Thomas tried to say. "I can see that the boy is here," she sneered. "And thanks to you, he thinks it's perfectly acceptable to clap for my attention." "Sorry, Miley," Thomas tried. "Sorry?" Miley tisked, wiping her hands on her apron and turning her attention to me. "So, you're Francine's boy." "I am." Miley looked me up and down just like I was a piece of abstract art. She cocked her head and closed her bad eye. "Smile for me," she asked. "What?" "Smile for me," she insisted. I smiled as wide as I could. "There it is," she said, happily clapping her own hands. "It's been years since I've seen Philip smile. Blinding if done right." "Thanks," I said, confused, but liking her all the same. "Where are the others?" Thomas asked, trying to sound dignified again. "How should I know?" Miley glared at him with both eyes. "Why don't you go clapping for them?" Thomas stepped to a long rope that hung against the wall just inside the kitchen door. He pulled on it 4 times, causing bells to ring throughout the house. I thought about informing him that there were more sophisticated ways of communicating these days, but Thomas rang the bells with such authority that I didn't dare say anything. In fact, no one said anything. Thomas and Miley and I simply stood there in silence until I couldn't take it any longer. "Is there a bathroom?" "More than 30 of them," Miley said proudly. "I only need 1. "Wait a moment," Thomas insisted. "Once you meet the staff, you can go." I couldn't wait to meet the staff. 2 minutes later, a young woman with short hair and shorter apron came walking quickly around the corner. The second she caught sight of me, she smiled wide. "Is this Beck?" she asked, walking right up to me and putting her arm around me. "Of course," Miley said. Welcome, she smiled, looking at me like I was a horse she was thinking of buying. I'm Wayne. Really? I asked without thinking. My father never really wanted children, she explained. His feelings waned even more after my birth. Oh, I said, not understanding at all. Wayne smiled. Look it up in the dictionary, she said kindly. It'll make more sense then. I had never used a dictionary in my entire life, but now I felt compelled to start. Wayne will look after you, Thomas said. I will? She questioned. Thomas gave her a look that could have turned helium into stone. Of course I will, she agreed. I have already contacted your school. School? I complained. It's in King's Plot, and you'll be expected to go, Miley spoke up. You can't just spend your days roaming around the mansion. That's exactly what I wanted to do. Show him to his room, Thomas said to Wayne. Miley will bring him something to eat later. I will? Miley complained, sounding like the older version of Wayne. Why not? Send the aged woman up the stairs. They obviously needed to get together to work out who did what to me when. Thomas and Miley began to argue about age and responsibility, while Wayne grabbed my suitcase and began to walk away. It seemed like a good idea to follow her. We stepped through the hall and into what looked to be another kitchen. This kitchen, however, was cold and dead, as if no one had cooked anything in it in some time. Once through the second kitchen, we entered a wide foyer with stairs that climbed up both sides of the walls. This isn't the main floor, Wayne said informatively. This floor is the kitchens and the servants' quarters. The walls and ceilings were ornate and rich-looking, but the rest of the floor was empty. There were no chairs or pictures or decorations of any kind. I figured it was because it was the servants' floor, but as we ascended the stairs to the main floor, I could see it was too incredibly bare and void of furniture. I wished Mr. Claude had the sense to pack my skateboard so I could skate around the house. It seems empty, I said. Your uncle has sold many of the furnishings, Wayne said. It looks like he sold them all, I said innocently. I wouldn't mention that to him, she said. He's touchy about it. This is the main floor. You're welcome to spend time here, but I suggest that if the door is locked, you leave it be. It was such a stupid thing to say to a bored 15-year-old. Come on, she insisted. We climbed another set of stairs, this one incredibly more lavish than the last. The rail was covered with intricately carved leaves and branches, and the edge of each step was gold. The stairs took us to the third floor. I was surprised to see a few pieces of furniture hulking under dusty white sheets. The entire house was gloomy and dark. The only light came from the hundreds of undressed windows along the walls. I couldn't see a lamp anywhere. I followed Wayne down a mustard-colored hall to a large bedroom that faced the front of the house. The front corner room had large windows on two of its walls. A big fancy high bed stood against the back wall, and two thick rugs lay on the wood floor. Near one window sat a soft-looking chair and a small square table with a lamp on it. I could also see two closet doors. This is your room, Wayne said kindly, setting down my suitcase by the door. Kind of lonely, but it should stay warm enough. There's a bathroom right across the hall. Who else lives on this floor? I asked nervously. No one. Just me? I panicked bravely, but not exactly comfortable with occupying an entire creepy floor by myself. Where's my uncle? Wayne looked around cautiously and then closed the door, trapping both of us in the room. Listen, she whispered. I know from what Miley's been telling me that you've had a bit of a rough spot, but there are a few things you should be careful of while you're here. Your uncle will call for you when he wants to. Understand? He's best not bothered. Lately, he seems even more confused than usual. You are welcome to wander the house, but the top floor is off limits. Your uncle resides above it in the dome. He doesn't like surprises. Also, as I've said, leave locked doors locked. You'll be perfectly safe right here. Miley will bring you food and collect your laundry, and Thomas will take you to where you need to go. You can spend time outside, but there's no going behind the mansion. Understand? Why? I had to ask. There's nothing back there but unmanaged landscape, Wayne answered. Scott, the gardener, can barely keep up with the front. You could hurt yourself or get lost. Lost? I laughed. Your uncle's property goes on for miles, Wayne said harshly. There have been more than a couple of people who have wandered off and never made it back. You're kidding. Wayne looked at me in such a way that I no longer doubted her sincerity. Is there a TV? I asked, looking around the sparse room. No, she said quickly. No TV? I asked, as panicked about that as having to stay here alone. I'll see if I can find you one, Wayne said sympathetically. There's probably one somewhere in this drafty house. Until then, I'll bring you some books. And a dictionary? Wayne smiled and nodded. Oh, and a skateboard? Wayne tilted her head and scrunched her face. I'll see what I can do, she finally said. Thanks, I said. I moved my suitcase to the bed and looked out the front window. The outdoors were still wet and green. Beck, Wayne said softly, I'm sorry for your situation, but we're glad you're here. It will be nice to have a little life back in this house. I know we can't replace your mother, but we love your uncle and feel as if we're all family. So if I can help you, just pull the bell rope hanging by your bed. I might not come instantly, but I'll make my way here as soon as possible. Is there a phone? In the kitchen, she answered. Do you need to call someone? I thought about it a second and realized that I had absolutely no one to call. Wayne looked around the room and tried to smile a comforting smile. You going to be okay? I nodded my head, wondering how in the world I could ever find enough words to express how uncomfortable and un-okay I actually was. Good, Wayne said, opening up the door. Welcome to the house of Phillips. Thomas will take you to school tomorrow morning. I'm sure gaining a few friends will make things easier. Wayne exited the room, closing the door behind her. I sat on the bed and put my head in my hands. The black t-shirt I was wearing expressed my feelings perfectly. I had never felt so alone. Hey friends, we're going to stop there, and tomorrow we will read chapter 5. See you tomorrow.